It seems like a rare item. Why does my younger sister-in-law own something like this? And even more importantly, my brother should prioritize respecting his own sister instead of some other woman. On the day of the wedding, before the ceremony began, I wanted to relax by checking on my cat using a pet camera. But instead of seeing my cat, the camera showed my dressed-up sister-in-law who was at our wedding. She didn't know there was a camera there and was going through my things without permission. When I showed this to my husband, he got really angry and stormed into the room where his relatives were waiting, showing them the live footage. My sister-in-law was caught singing and complaining about my husband while trying on my things. When my in-laws saw her behaving badly, they looked shocked and quickly left the room. A few minutes later, my sister-in-law faced the consequences of her actions, thinking she hadn't been caught and acting boldly. I've been working at the same company since I finished university 3 years ago. About 2 years into my job, a male colleague who I had grown close to confessed his love for me and asked for a serious relationship leading to marriage. I happily accepted his proposal. A year has gone by since then, and we're busy getting ready for our wedding. We found a new home not far from my in-laws, and our parents helped us out bit by bit, calling it a wedding gift. With their support, we bought a second-hand house. We had to take out a loan to cover the rest of the cost. But both my husband and my in-laws agreed that I should keep working after we got married. We were hopeful that by working together, we could pay off the loan faster. We chose a house instead of an apartment for a special reason. I really love cats, and I grew up surrounded by them at my parents' house. When I went to university in another state and had to live on my own, I couldn't imagine leaving my cats behind. When I decided to live alone, my parents weren't keen on me taking a cat with me, but I convinced them by promising to work part-time and take care of it myself. In the end, I could only bring one cat from my parents' house, but I made sure it didn't feel lonely while I juggled my studies and job. After I graduated, I stayed in the same apartment that allowed pets, but after getting married, it became clear that the apartment was too small. I was really upset at the thought of having to send my cat back to my parents' place. Cats mean a lot to me. They're like close companions. Having my beloved cat with me helped me through tough exams and the loneliness of living alone for the first time. My husband knew about my love for cats even before we started dating, so he was fine with having one. But it was hard to find a place that allowed pets. It wasn't too difficult to find a small place for one person, but finding something suitable for 2 adults, possibly with kids later on, and within our budget was proving tough. During a visit to my in-laws' home for wedding arrangements, I bonded with my mother-in-law over our love for cats. Since she was from the same area as my in-laws, I thought she might know about places to rent that allowed pets. Excitedly, she suggested, "Why not buy a house?" It turns out my mother-in-law used to live with cats before she married, but had to stop when she found out my father-in-law was allergic to them. Maybe feeling a bit guilty, my father-in-law didn't object to the idea and even helped us financially. Feeling it wouldn't be fair to rely only on my in-laws, I told my parents about the situation. They offered to help, mainly for the sake of the cat. My dad kept saying it was just for the cat's sake, but my mom assured me, "He's just shy, don't worry. It's a wedding gift," and gave me a knowing smile. My dad has always been reserved about showing his true feelings, and it was funny to see him act shy at a time like this. My mom and I couldn't help but laugh together. Thanks to our parents' help, we found our new home much quicker than expected and decided to move in before the wedding. My mother-in-law, who loves cats and stays active despite being in her 50s, works part-time, enjoys hobbies, and regularly visits a cat cafe to relax. Knowing she'd get along well with our cat, I invited her over soon after we moved in. To my surprise, our cat really liked her, and they had a great time together. Since then, she's been visiting often, not just to play with the cat, but also to share recipes and gossip about my husband's favorite dishes. She's gone out of her way to bond with me, and it's made our relationship really strong. My husband and I are already living together in our new home, so it feels like we've started married life early. We work at the same company, but he recently got transferred to a different department, which he's excited about. Even though our work hours differ, we both pitch in with household chores and cooking dinner when we get home. So far, we've been managing things pretty evenly. During our commute, my husband reads the newspaper for work, while I check on our cat through the pet camera. It's a routine that helps us both relax. Even on the crowded train, seeing my cat calms me down a lot. It's just one good thing after another. When I went to my husband's family home to formally meet everyone, I didn't just meet his parents for the first time. I had heard about his unmarried sister since we started dating. She's quite adventurous, with a love for traveling internationally. Instead of a regular job, she does different part-time work to save money for her trips. It seems like she's living her dream. I've always admired people with passions, and I believe that when everyone has their own interests, they tend to respect and get along with each other. So her unconventional lifestyle wasn't a big deal to me. To be honest, one big reason I chose to work full-time was because I love being surrounded by cats. Having the security of paid leave in case something happened to them was a big factor for me. Part-time jobs usually don't offer that. I also have a strong desire to travel. When I lived at home, I went on a few international trips with my family. Exploring new places is always exciting, and I thought I'd get along well with my sister-in-law. However, my husband had a lot of complaints about her. He told me how she caused him trouble, like spending his money without permission or dipping into the savings he worked hard to build up from his own part-time job. Thinking his piggy bank was an easy target, he even had to get his own bank account set up by his parents, but she still somehow managed to access it without his consent. He used simple pins back then, which made it easy for her to take advantage. He felt like he was being robbed. He was really upset, maybe because he was remembering those emotions, as she also had a habit of using and damaging his belongings without asking. Their relationship seemed strained. My husband's story sounded truthful and not exaggerated. But I didn't want to pick sides and ruin my relationship with my sister-in-law before it even began. While I listened to my husband, I made a mental note to stay neutral. The sister-in-law I met was nothing like the way my husband described her. She was completely different. As we all sat down for dinner with the in-laws, she opened up about her hobbies and was really easy to talk to. Despite the tension with my husband, I felt like we could get along, especially as women. She's in her early 30s but has a really positive outlook on life, probably because of her carefree lifestyle. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she was putting on an act. Was she being cautious around me, or was she exaggerating her carefree persona out of consideration? That's what I wondered. But as the evening went on and we all shared warm conversation, my in-laws officially welcomed us into the family with words of encouragement. My mother-in-law, drawing from her own experience, mentioned how tough it can be to balance work and household chores. She encouraged us to support each other. My husband, who had decided to support my career, confidently said he could handle the household chores, having learned from his mother. She seemed a bit worried and told us not to hesitate to ask for help if we needed it. With those words, the meet and greet for our wedding ended on a positive note. Things took a turn for the worse when my sister-in-law, unaware of the atmosphere, piped up, "With both of you working, you'll be swimming in money, right? Saving up for a rainy day, huh? If I end up single and old, you'll take care of me with that savings, won't you? So if I never marry, you've got my back." Her suggestion was that we should live off my husband's salary alone and save my entire paycheck so that if she never got married and grew old, we use that money to support her. I was shocked. It took me a moment to process what she had said, and I was speechless. But my husband understood immediately. "Are you serious? Why should we worry about your retirement when you've chosen not to plan for it?" He snapped back. He made it clear that her disrespectful comment was not our responsibility and firmly told her off. The in-laws were too taken aback to brush off her remark and asked her to leave the room, apologizing to us for her rudeness. After this incident, I made a conscious effort to avoid any interaction with my sister-in-law. While I believe everyone has the right to choose their own path in life, asking someone you barely know to take care of you in your old age is unreasonable, especially considering what my husband had told me about how she used his money and earnings from his part-time jobs without permission. I felt like she was now eyeing my income. She seemed too eager to rely on us for support, and I couldn't bring myself to warm up to her. She completely disregarded my attempts to build a relationship and get along. Even as she claimed it was just a joke to lighten the mood, it wasn't funny. She came across as immature and unable to gauge the situation. Despite her outburst, I made plans to visit my in-laws' home when I knew she would be out working part-time. So from our first meeting until the day of our wedding, I never saw her again until the very end. My husband didn't want his sister to attend the wedding, and I understood his reasons. We didn't want any disruptive behavior on our special day. However, I worried about what she might do if she felt excluded, so I convinced my husband that it would be better to have her there under someone's supervision. He reluctantly agreed. I also felt anxious about her behavior in front of my parents, relatives, and friends. The in-laws assured us they would keep a close eye on her, so I had to trust them. But my sister-in-law still managed to cause chaos with her outrageous actions. It wasn't just about us anymore. She had dragged the in-laws and all the relatives into the situation. As my husband and I arrived at the wedding venue and got ready in our separate dressing rooms, he surprised me by coming into mine. He looked dashing in his light-colored vest and morning suit, while I wore a beautiful white wedding dress that was a bit tricky to move around in on my own. I didn't want to ask him to stay with me out of loneliness, especially since he had to greet his work colleagues, so I was thrilled when he came to visit. The time before the wedding ceremony was a nice distraction for me. It wasn't just about passing the time. It had become a comforting routine. I'd check on our cat through the pet camera and feel warm and fuzzy when my husband joined me. Just as I was about to check the camera on my phone, my husband walked in. He had grown quite fond of our cat since we got one. "Do you want to watch together?" I asked, and he said yes. It seemed like he was more focused on adjusting to his morning suit than anything else. Taking advantage of his kindness, I opened the pet camera app. But instead of seeing our beloved cat, I saw my sister-in-law. We had received a message from my mother-in-law while we were on our way to the venue. She mentioned that she was bringing my sister-in-law along. We had agreed to keep each other informed to prevent any trouble, and my mother-in-law had assured us that they would be under supervision since they were driving. So why was my sister-in-law here? At that moment, I called out loudly to my husband, still unaware of what was happening. He naively told me I didn't need to shout, but when he saw the live feed from the pet camera, he was speechless. Uncharacteristically, he let out a few expletives, showing just how angry he was. Then he stormed out of the dressing room, and I hurriedly followed him. I kicked off my heels, knowing I might trip in them, and even though it felt undignified, I removed my veil and lifted the hem of my dress to run. My husband went straight to the family's waiting room, wanting to give our out-of-town family a comfortable place to rest. However, instead of the usual waiting room, it was more like a banquet hall, complete with a large screen. When I caught up to him, the whole family was surprised and confused by his actions. He was speaking to his parents, but he was so angry that his words were unclear. Seeing me, he asked for my smartphone. Using it, he projected the live feed from the pet camera onto the big screen and turned up the volume so everyone could hear. At first, the family thought it was some sort of joke or skit, watching my sister-in-law's behavior with disbelief. Some even muttered about how she always did outrageous things. But when she started ranting about my husband while humming, the mood in the room turned tense and uncomfortable. "He's cutting off his own sister. What's wrong with him? Having tea with my sister-in-law isn't a big deal, right? I mean, my sister-in-law has a job, so why should he care?" she said. "Remember when my brother gave his wife that fancy engagement ring and sometimes buys trendy jewelry? I'm sure that was all for me," she muttered, thinking she didn't need those accessories anymore since she was single. My sister-in-law went through my dresser meticulously, even saying she'd sell anything that didn't suit her or looked valuable. I had given my mother-in-law a spare key so she could visit and play with the cat anytime. Knowing this, my sister-in-law, who had been banned from our house, took advantage of my mother-in-law's absence during the wedding to sneak in and search for valuables. When my in-laws realized what had happened, they immediately apologized to me, their faces pale with shock. When we arrived at the venue, my sister-in-law excused herself to use the restroom. Normally, you wouldn't think someone needed to be washed all the way to the restroom, especially if they were brought to a venue. My husband, my in-laws, and I never expected my sister-in-law to do something so extreme as to come to the venue without informing us. Who would have imagined that on the day of her own brother's wedding, she would sneak into our house to steal? My in-laws apologized again, stressing that stopping my sister-in-law's actions was the priority. With that, my father-in-law hurried out of the waiting room, followed by my mother-in-law. The relatives on my husband's side seemed bewildered. They might have been struggling to process their feelings, worried that a criminal might be part of the family. Unaware of the relatives' concerns, my sister-in-law found branded accessories in my dresser and tried them on with a satisfied smile. even checking the resale value on her phone. The relatives in the waiting room began to grumble about my sister-in-law's behavior and expressed distrust towards the in-laws who raised her. They questioned her upbringing, suggesting that being unemployed and single past 30 might have led to her actions. Regarding this, I wonder if my husband should apologize. He doesn't care about the relatives' opinions and is focused on making his sister atone for her actions. I could see him struggling to control his anger, clenching his fists repeatedly. I felt angry and shocked, but I realized my sister-in-law and I were very different people. Talking to someone like her would be pointless. Even if she faced consequences, she'd likely forget about it by the next day. She doesn't learn from her mistakes or have any desire to grow. I swore that even if my husband or in-laws begged for forgiveness, I wouldn't let her back into our lives. But I doubted my husband would want that either. About 10 minutes after my in-laws had left, the live video took a dramatic turn. As my sister-in-law was busy searching through our things, my father-in-law burst into the room before she could react. She was completely startled when she heard the door swing open and felt someone grab her from behind. "What are you doing here in my son and daughter-in-law's house when you're banned?" Her face showed clear shock. Our new home didn't have any security measures, and it seemed she had done her research knowing this. She must have found a way to sneak in without being noticed by the in-laws, knowing my mother-in-law had a spare key. But she clearly hadn't thought about what would happen if she got caught. She stumbled over her words, trying to make excuses. I was asked by my sister-in-law, "Look, I even found the jewelry. That's proof, right?" Following behind, my mother-in-law entered the room holding a smartphone. She loudly announced that she would report the illegal entry to the police. "Why would I ask you, someone who's banned, and why are you wearing the jewelry you claim to have found?" she demanded. My sister-in-law's feeble excuses were met with strong arguments from my mother-in-law. As my sister-in-law looked for a way to escape, my father-in-law held her down with all his weight. She complained of pain and said she would suffocate, but my father-in-law firmly told her that if she could shout, she wasn't going to die. At that moment, the police arrived, having been notified. They took my sister-in-law away as a trespasser, but she kept resisting, claiming, "Just because I entered a family member's home, that's trespassing. Are the police idiots?" My mother-in-law informed her that all the evidence was there, and the entire family had seen it happen in real time, thanks to the pet camera. When my sister-in-law saw the bedroom camera, she seemed to give up and was quietly taken away by the police. I felt relieved at the sight. I hadn't expected my in-laws to involve the police, but I was grateful they took appropriate action. However, it was complicated to feel simply happy about it, knowing that a real sister had committed a criminal act. Despite their animosity, they were still siblings, and I knew my husband must have his own thoughts about it. The relatives in the room on my husband's side were in shock. The fact that a criminal had emerged from the family was hard to swallow. Some were disappointed, while others openly expressed their anger at the disgrace. Amidst the chaos, my in-laws returned after handing my sister-in-law over to the police. Naturally, the wedding couldn't proceed under these circumstances and was canceled. Some guests had traveled long distances to celebrate with us, and others had rearranged their schedules to be there. I felt a mix of regret and a desire for understanding. My in-laws quickly realized my feelings and repeatedly apologized to us, bowing their heads. My mother-in-law blamed herself for not keeping a better eye on her daughter and apologized repeatedly. She also silently endured the furious remarks from the entire family, apologizing endlessly for bringing such disgrace upon them. When my parents, concerned, peeked into the room and saw the chaos, they asked me for an explanation. I could have told my parents that my sister-in-law had broken into our new home to steal, but I wasn't sure how much they would believe. However, when my in-laws noticed my parents were there, they came over and apologized to them without explanation. As they revealed what their daughter had done, my parents' expressions grew complicated. My husband knew his sister had issues, but he had no idea she was this foolish. Despite being a victim himself, he, along with his parents, apologized to mine. But neither my parents nor I could simply brush it off, and a heavy, indescribable silence hung in the air. After some thought, my parents said they would leave future decisions up to us. But they agreed to cancel the wedding for the time being, and that settled things. Later, my sister-in-law got off with just a fine because it was her first offense, and she hadn't actually stolen anything. My husband bitterly remarked that she should have been arrested for theft and spent some time in jail. I somewhat agreed, wanting nothing to do with her going forward. Although she only received a fine, she now had a criminal record, and my in-laws severely scolded her for breaking into someone's house while they were away. Even though she was family, my daughter would know right from wrong well past the age of 30. My father-in-law was furious to the point where I thought his veins might burst, and I heard he disowned her right then and there. She had to cover all the wedding-related expenses, including those from the cancellation. My sister-in-law, who had spent all her part-time job earnings, had to borrow from various lenders to cover the costs. Some lenders were reputable, but others operated in shady ways, barely within the law. Now, she faced a future of hard work and being pursued by debt collectors. Unable to accept what had happened, my sister-in-law turned to social media to express her frustrations and seek sympathy. However, instead of support, she faced a wave of criticism. Her photo, real name, and criminal record were spread all over the internet, and a simple search would bring up these details. Although she later deleted her posts, someone had saved the logs, ensuring that her rants remained online. Even when she created new social media accounts, she was quickly identified, ensuring that her criminal past continued to haunt her. She lost her previous part-time job because her criminal record could damage the reputation of the company. Additionally, she was fired from other jobs after her coworkers found out about her past. Currently, she's struggling to get by, working physically demanding jobs like construction, and barely managing to make her debt payments. It's nearly impossible for her to resume her hobby of traveling abroad. After everything settled down, we had a small, intimate wedding with just close friends and family. It was a do-it-yourself affair with the help of colleagues and friends. But it was filled with love and will be a cherished memory for life. We've also adopted a new cat and are enjoying our happy days surrounded by our furry friend and supportive loved ones.